Thanks for tuning into the For Those Made to Do podcast. We are your hosts, Mandy, Sahota,
and Bianca, Pavel. This podcast is all about the doers who have achieved career success in the UAE and the stories that go with it.
In this episode of For Those Made to Do Entrepreneurship, we're speaking to Megan Adams. She wonderfully shares her experience of working with startups in the region and what she has observed are key to their successes. We address themes on what key skills are integral to being a successful founder and the value of choosing the right talent and what to look for.
If you've been wondering whether entrepreneurs are born or made, what entrepreneurship is and why it's a great stepping stone into entrepreneurship, and the key industry most prone to disruption and innovation in the UAE, then grab a pen and paper. It's time to take some notes. Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of For Those Made to Do. Today, we're shining a light on a career path that's boasting with innovation and opportunity, and one of my favorite topics to dive into, entrepreneurship. What excites us the most about MENA startups is that they're carving new pathways in a region steeped with history and culture, and they're bringing about profound economic transformation in the process. In 2023 alone, MENA startups closed $2.6 billion in funding across 500 deals, which is a huge increase from 10 years ago when this market started growing in the region. However, given the impact of global inflation and oil production curbs, the industry actually saw a 23% decrease, so local entrepreneurs are not having an easy time raising investment. Looking ahead to 2024, experts predict that venture capital investment will continue to rise, with sectors such as e-commerce, fintech, and healthcare attracting most of the funding. To better understand the ins and outs of this really exciting space and what it takes to launch a successful business in the region, we're incredibly happy to have with us multiple-time founder Megan Adams and current entrepreneur in residence at Raha Beach Ventures. Megan, welcome to our studio. We're so excited to have you, and also a big thank you for braving through the weather to get to us today. How are you doing?
Amazing. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Megan. Really excited to kick off the conversation with you today. We normally start with an icebreaker. So with that in mind, what is one product that you use regularly when it comes to a local startup in the region?
So there's a lot to choose from, but I have to give a shout out to a favorite shoe brand called Shooks. I don't know if you guys have heard of them.
Not yet, no.
You're missing out. So it's spelled shoe with a Q at the end of it. They're Dubai based, but they have boutiques both in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and you can order them online. They're handcrafted, incredibly comfortable, and really cute. So highly recommend you get some Shooks.
Nice.
We'll get some new shoes today.
Wrote that down. Okay, fantastic. Can you tell us a bit about Raha Beach Ventures and your mission as a startup studio to start with?
Absolutely. So we actually started out calling ourselves a startup studio. We then transitioned into calling ourselves a venture builder. And while we're still using the title of venture builder, we don't quite fit into that box either. So let me try to explain a little bit. We often get confused for an accelerator, an incubator, but we're none of those things. Our model is to focus on 1 to 2 very specific projects per year and focus on launching those. So we are still a venture builder in the sense that we benefit from economies of scale. So having policies and procedures in place for launching things rapidly. We have internal teams in marketing, design, development that enable us to move swiftly to leverage the networks that we do have. But we don't take the approach of traditional startup studios or venture builders that take the economy of scale approach in the sense of, let's build a whole bunch of things, throw it against the wall and see what sticks. So we're kind of our own model, I guess you could say. And that's how we operate. We specialize in software as a service companies, leveraging deep tech, big data, those types of things.
Nice. So what exciting developments have you seen since being in your role throughout 2023 brought to the UAE startup ecosystem?
There's so much happening in the UAE startup ecosystem that honestly, even though this is where I live and breathe, it's hard to keep up. There's so much happening all the time. On any given weekend, you could find yourself at a different festival, at a different venue, at a different opportunity to meet and greet with other people who are operating in this space. Just last weekend, there was the Sharjah Entrepreneurship Festival, which by all accounts was absolutely amazing. Entrepreneurs from all over the world and the region came together to talk about upcoming opportunities. We have GITEX here, which is absolutely huge, mind-blowing. They recently changed venues because it was too big to be accommodated.
Yeah.
In Abu Dhabi, the ADGM space is constantly hosting things supported by Hub 71. There's multiple groups that you can become a part of as a startup founder that offers support in various different levels.
In this region, when, say, founders kind of venture into these places and they're so vast and big and, you know, they're quite kind of overly stimulating with lots of kind of activities and booths and things like that, you know, what do you see the value in putting yourself out there as a founder in this region specifically?
That is such a good question. I think a mistake that early founders make, and I'm going to do my best today to provide tips and tricks based on the mistakes that I've learned. And this is going to be kind of tip and trick number one, is edit your time, because there are so many resources and so many opportunities to founders here. You really have to budget your time so wisely. And this is a great example of an area that you have to do that, because there is so much going on, because you could be at a conference on any given weekend. You really have to figure out, where do I need to be? What is my niche? What are my weaknesses? Where do I need to be making connections? And using your time accordingly. There's some really key times in a startup's life cycle that you need to be making connections. The kind of connections that you're looking for are obviously, you know, funding, but also finding mentors in your space, finding competitors in your space, finding people that complement your skill sets, recruiting. There's these specific kind of timeline spaces that you want to be out in the community, interacting with the community, but you don't ever want to be interacting just for interaction's sake. You want to be going to these events with a clear sense of purpose. You know, why am I going to this conference? What am I hoping to gain from this? Who am I hoping to talk to? I mean, you're not going there to get a tote bag and some swag.
Absolutely.
You don't have time for that. So you have to really have a clear sense of purpose going to each and every one of these events. But the great news is there are so many to choose from, and the opportunities are unbelievable here. The amount of talent that they bring from abroad and the amount of talent that's here in the region is just unprecedented. We're at a huge advantage to be here in the UAE in this startup ecosystem.
Cool.
I love
Thank you.
that. And Meg, before we go any further, I think we should pause to ask a question that a lot of people have debated over and over since, you know, we've been hearing about entrepreneurship. In your opinion, are entrepreneurs born or made?
I love this question so much. So much. Before we go any further, I also want to clarify that I don't consider myself an expert in entrepreneurship. I'm really honored that you're having me here to talk about this. I'm someone who's walked the entrepreneurship path, but I'm just here sharing based on my experiences. So thank you for hearing me out. On the topic of, are entrepreneurs born or made? I'm going to say both, and I'm not copping out here. So let me kind of clarify. I think entrepreneurs are born. I think successful entrepreneurs are made. And what I mean by that is I think there are key personality traits that people are born with that lead them to become entrepreneurs.
Like what?
So I have a list of 5, and I've written them down so that I don't leave anything out. At the top of my list is intellectual curiosity. In order to be an entrepreneur, I believe you need to be innately curious. You have to be curious about the world around you, and you have to question things. You can't accept the status quo. You have to ask yourself why about everything. Why are things done this way? You can't accept that we do things because that's the way things have always been done. So asking yourself why and being willing and eager to learn constantly is essential to being an entrepreneur, because this is something that is the only constant throughout the entire entrepreneurial journey, this willingness and eagerness to be constantly learning. Number 2, I have self-motivated and being a competitive overachiever. As an entrepreneur, I'm not going to lie to you, it's really hard. And you can't count on exterior sources of motivation or validation to keep you going, because you're not always going to get that. You have to have some sort of drive that's within yourself that keeps you going. So I think that is essential for becoming an entrepreneur at all, and especially becoming a successful one. The third is creativity. And creativity takes so many different forms. I mean, it takes as many forms as there are people. But as an entrepreneur, you have to look at so many different kinds of problems and look for creative solutions. And I think there's a really interesting intersection between solving problems and even like the artistic side of the brain. Seeing the world in an artistic way, I think, is part of entrepreneurship. I mean, obviously, this depends on, what industry you're dealing with. This creativity component, I think, is a very central theme to entrepreneurship. Fourth is a collaborative personality. You can't be an entrepreneur by yourself. There's just no way. I don't care who you are, how amazing you are. If you look at any successful entrepreneur, historically speaking, none of them did it by themselves. So you have to have a spirit of collaboration and be willing to, again, it comes back to the first one, being willing and eager to learn, and be willing and eager to collaborate with others as well. And some people put it as you need to have leadership skills. I think collaboration is at the top of the list of leadership skills as well. So, and then last but not least, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later as well, is adaptability. Entrepreneurship is all about adaptability. There's a saying, adapt or die, right? So being willing to listen to data, pivot based on data. This is, I think, the fifth element of personality traits that make entrepreneurs. And these skills and personality traits develop over time as well and can be honed to become a successful entrepreneur.
That's amazing. And I think if anyone's listening and they see themselves in these character traits, then hopefully they're inspired by that, because I think you put it so well. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, but also being realistic about where they are on that scale. How adaptable am I actually? Not in the sense of how adaptable do I think I am overall, but by evidence in my day-to-day work, in my studies, in whatever I'm doing, how have I demonstrated that adaptability and to what extent? And if I haven't been there at least 80% to 90%, then okay, I need to work on that. So, because I need to have that. I completely agree with you. As a successful entrepreneur, I need to hit that 80-90% adaptability, because the markets will change and the conditions will change. So then I have to demonstrate that. I really love this list, so thank you for sharing that with us. And to pick on something that you mentioned on point number 3 around creativity and how it applies to certain industries, I wanted to ask you if, in your experience, you've seen any industries in the UAE that are more conducive to startup growth and the ones that need more innovation, where some of our listeners can perhaps kind of look at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I want to emphasize something that you just said that I think is so important to touch on. Going back to the theme of are entrepreneurs born or made? What you're talking about, I think, is the concept of self-reflection and being willing to look at yourself and be honest with yourself in a critical way, to assess yourself through an honest lens. And this is what sets apart the born entrepreneurs and the made entrepreneurs. This skill is what makes that difference. So for anyone listening, this tip from Bianca is absolutely huge. And this is really, really a challenging thing to do, because you're not always going to like the answer that you get. And this is one of the big challenges, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the challenges of becoming an entrepreneur is gauging these personality traits, because odds are you don't, pop into the world being 100% on all 5 of these things. So addressing these weaknesses is what takes you from born to made. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Bianca. That's huge. To answer your next question, what industries is the UAE really primed to do well in terms of the startup space? I think there's a really key standout, and that's the space of artificial intelligence, or AI. The UAE is, I think, uniquely situated. Again, I'm not an expert on AI. I am working on multiple AI projects right now that I'm super excited about. But the UAE is, on a whole, to kind of make a generalized statement, I think really open to innovation and wanting to be on the forefront of things that are exciting and new and groundbreaking. And AI is one of those fields. Examples of this include the fact that, there's an office of AI within the government, which I think is really forward thinking. There's a university here that's dedicated specifically to AI. So MBZ, University of Artificial Intelligence. There's a collaboration with Oxford University that UAE officials can go there and study AI. So there's this huge focus on, a vote of confidence on behalf of the government that AI is the future. The country's on board with that. They're making big steps. TII has released Falcon, which is absolutely amazing on the front end of what's happening. There's AI 71 now, which is open sourcing data for AI, which supports data sovereignty, which is a huge component of, talking about the future of AI. So the UAE is really just leaps and bounds ahead in terms of embracing AI, making innovation in AI possible. And I find that personally incredibly exciting. So in terms of, if you want to get in on something that's going to be changing the world, you've come to the right place. This is what's happening. It's happening now. It's supported. This is an amazing ecosystem for that.
We have an episode on innovation, and we actually had a guest from the Dubai Future Foundation, which is a part of the government, and we talked a lot about that. And they were organizing the Future Leaders Forum last year, and the topic was AI. So a lot of different governments from all around the world would get together, but also with private sector leaders, with startups, SMEs, corporates, to talk about the future of the country in the context of AI and what kind of innovation can be derived from there. So I'm completely aligned with what you're saying. I think it's fantastic to see so much drive from the government side here in that space. And now I wanted to kind of shift towards corporates and how they engage with startups here and what you're seeing in that space. Does the concept of the entrepreneur exist here in the UAE? And if so, what does it look like as a career path?
I can't speak to entrepreneurs here within the UAE specifically, but I can speak as a former informal entrepreneur, I guess you could say. In my opinion, an entrepreneur is essentially an entrepreneur who is operating within the safety of a corporate environment. So it's a highly de-risked role because you have the support of the organization behind you, but you still have the creativity and freedom to be creating novel solutions to real world problems. I think this is a fantastic entry point for people who are interested in entrepreneurship, because you do get the real world experience of solving problems, of thinking outside of the box, but you also have the safety net of having a corporation and the support that entails behind you. You're not worried about, how am I going to pay my rent? Am I going to eat something besides ramen this week? So it's kind of, not all of the benefits, but many of the benefits, and a kind of a safe space to experiment. I think this is an amazing jumping off point. I also believe that in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, you can be an entrepreneur wherever you are. Entrepreneurship is kind of, in my opinion, a state of mind. It's having the 5 characteristics or traits that we talked about previously and just applying them to your job. So identifying problems, being curious, and applying creativity. Why are we doing it this way? Because we've always done it this way is not an acceptable answer to an entrepreneur. And then proposing solutions and solving them in a creative way. And that's essentially what entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship is. It's identifying problems, it's solving problems creatively. It's really being a scientist in a lot of ways. Honestly, it's really a lot of fun. So I encourage you, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, to be an entrepreneur.
To explore this path. Yeah,
exactly.
And if I were to think about it, I think there are 2 entry points or 2 setups for entrepreneurship. On one side, you kind of have the structured space where you're looking at a company like EY or Google, some of the big ones that realize that there's been a lot of disruption coming from startups. And so they started their own innovation hubs. And so they put their most creative people and all the other 4 traits that you mentioned before into these innovation hubs within the corporate setting and said, look, our industry will have disruption, whether we like it or not. It might be better if it comes from within our company, so it doesn't rule us out and make us irrelevant in the next 5 years. So here's some budget and here's a team of people, go and ideate and come up with something new. Then the other setting I've seen, and that was kind of firsthand from my experience working for Virgin Group, was when someone within the business genuinely found a blind spot for the business and they said, I think we should pivot in this direction.
Yes,
and
the organic entrepreneurship.
The core, hardcore entrepreneur who went to the MD and said, let's try this out. And off the back of that, Virgin Red was born, which is a company within the Virgin Group that is focused on customer rewards, basically reward points. And that's kind of the red thread across the whole group now. And it's a fairly new company. It's only been around for 5 or 6 years. They started off as a small team of 5. Then they grew massively to about 50. Then they kind of spinned out and went on their own as a completely independent company. And then they were bought back by Virgin Group, I think a few years later, for millions of pounds.
Love that.
So there you have 2 completely different pathways where one is kind of set up from the beginning and the other one is where, the entrepreneur creates a business model within a large group and then goes through all the steps of kind of entrepreneurship and creation, which I think is fantastic because it reduces the risk to some extent, but it still allows you to create a business where there wasn't one before.
We touched on how the UAE is primed for startups and founders, and there are multiple ways in which you can get set up here, one of which is the free zones. So how does the UAE free zone system impact the process of setting up a business? And what advantages do entrepreneurs gain from establishing their companies in these zones? If you could shed a bit of light on that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So obviously, when you're starting a company, you need to be legally compliant. You need to get your company set up. You need to get your company registered. And in the UAE, that means you have a lot of different options. At last count, there's over 40 different free zones in the UAE. And each of them have a distinct set of benefits associated with them. So an overarching common benefit among all of them is that expats or foreign investors can have 100% ownership of their company when registered with the free zone. There's tax benefits associated with that. There are communities and niche markets associated with these as well. So you have the opportunity to gain connections in your field. So if you're a shipping and logistics company, you can be with other shipping and logistics companies. You can compare notes. You can be motivated by other people who are doing what you're doing. But this also comes with some challenges as well, right? Because in each one of these 40 different free zones, there's just as many different policies and procedures and process flows and laws, and staying up to date on these and knowing what they are can be challenging. So for anyone who is looking to start a new company, you really should get legal counsel on this. There's implications for follow-on investing as well. Depending on where you're registered, your company may be more or less attractive to investors in the future. So again, I am not an expert in this field. The companies that I have worked with and for have been mainland companies with local investors and also registered at ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Marketplace.
Cool. And obviously, company setup and establishing yourself is one challenge. The other biggest challenge that I think startups face is around talent. So, in your opinion, how are successful startups in UAE navigating the challenges of talent acquisition and retention in such a competitive market and in such a global landscape as well?
This could be an entire podcast series, but I really love that you asked this question. This is something that I have spent so much time in the last, how long have I been here? 12 years working on and through, have learned so much about this. And I think that this is a really key component of your startup that you need to be strategizing on early and very, very carefully. Your team is your company. So the decisions that you make in terms of who your team is absolutely everything, especially in an early stage startup. Again, no matter how amazing you are as a founder, you are going to have gaps in your skill set, and you're going to need to mitigate those gaps by bringing on talent. This takes time and this takes money. And those are the two things as an early stage startup founder that you just don't have. So the challenges here are very significant. According to Forbes, it takes 6 months to hire someone to a startup. And that's just a generic figure. So in the UAE, I'm not sure exactly the time frame. I've seen it take longer in my experience, especially if you're bringing in overseas talent into the country. And that has additional risks in that as well, right? You're not sure if someone that you're bringing from abroad is going to do well in this new environment. You're bringing someone into a place that they don't have their same support system that they had before. And this is a huge financial risk for a company to take on, especially a startup.
Both for the hiring manager and the candidate as well. You know, when you're looking to kind of move into a new role and it's a startup, everyone has that kind of risky connotation to it. It's not necessarily negative, but you know that, you know, it could go either way. It could be super successful or it could collapse, you know, in a short period of time. I think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about this. Well, Bianca mentioned about the self-reflection, because without that, without knowing how you are as a leader, without knowing, you know, what you need to offset the skills that you don't have, and really kind of thinking about that deeply, I think hiring the right talent is so difficult. And I think when it's your business and you're the founder, you're very close to it. So you're not looking at it objectively either, because you have an emotional attachment. So I can imagine it being a very kind of hard decision to make, to find the right talent, because obviously there's so much risk involved that you want to get it right first time, but it doesn't work like that, unfortunately.
It really doesn't. And another like big mistake that I've personally made when hiring is you see these, what I call rock star resumes. You see someone who's, coming from a big four, they're a total rock star, they're managing giant teams, they've had, these accolades, they're total rock stars by any definition. But that is not a cultural fit for a startup. And it seems so obvious when I say it now, but when you're in the thick of it and you're thinking, who do I need for my company? You're thinking, I need the best of the best. I need someone to bring in the skill set I don't have. But what you're forgetting is when you're in those early days, you don't need a master. You need a jack of all trades. You need someone who is willing to, for lack of a better term, get their hands dirty. You're looking for someone who is excited by the concept of doing everything, but you want them to be good at the things that you're not good at. And this is a totally different mindset. You have to have a completely different perspective on how you measure someone's success. And again, while I say it now, it seems so incredibly obvious, but I've seen other people make this mistake also. The way that we look at a candidate and we determine, is this a rock star or is this not, is very different for hiring someone for a startup than for a company that's in the maintenance phases of success. So, huge tip for people who are looking to bring on staff for their startup is you want to find people who are well suited for startup life. And y'all, believe me when I tell you that startup life is totally different. It's not for people who are looking for work-life balance. And I say that almost regretting it immediately because this is something that is so popular right now, talking about, the importance of self-care, the importance of maintaining a work-life balance. And these are things that I do believe in. These are things that I want for people. But if we're being real, these aren't things that you are going to achieve in the early days of a startup company. So when you're looking for the rock stars to join your early stage startup, you're looking for people who are hungry, the people who, when you call them at 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday because you have a surprise demo on a Monday, they don't say, sorry, I already put in my 40 hours this week. They're the person who says, oh my gosh, I'm so excited we have this demo. I'll see you in 10 minutes. I'm bringing you coffee. It's a completely different metric of success. There's a great quote from the CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, and he said, the secret to successful hiring is this: look for people who want to change the world. And really, this is, I think, sums it up so perfectly for finding your startup team is you're looking for people who want to change the world in the same way that you are. So what is your company doing to change the world? And are the people you're hiring wanting to change the world the same way? Do they believe in the problem that you're trying to solve? Do they believe that your solution is the answer to that problem? I think a lot of times when we hire people just as a blanket statement, we're looking at keywords for hard skills. Does this person know Microsoft Office? Does this person know, this certain accounting software? Like whatever it is, we have this list of hard skills that we're trying to check off. But what we should be looking for is aptitude. We should be looking for those 5 things that we were talking about before, because you can teach people hard skills. You can teach someone Microsoft Excel. You can teach people coding languages, but you can't teach people curiosity. You can't teach people to be excited to wake up on a weekend to prep for a demo. These are innate traits that you can't put a price on, and you can't put them on a keyword on your resume. And those are the things as a startup founder that you should be hiring for, in my humble, non-expert opinion.
Well, we did an episode on the future of work, and I think there are some stats from the World Economic Forum about the trends and the characteristics in accordance to the future of work. And the top five are all soft skills. And I think, given how kind of AI is advancing, like you said, those hard skills, they will adapt and they will change in whatever capacity that looks like. But I think the kind of softer skills, like you said, they can be developed, but they can't be taught. So I think this is really, really valuable advice. And I love the way you put it as well. Fantastic.
Yeah. And just because we started on this thread, can you share with us from your experience a bit about where startups fail and why? Because we've all heard the daunting figure that 90% of startups fail, and I don't think it's 90%, but
it's probably more, honestly.
Yeah. And
not to be the little rain cloud in the room, but
and again, back to your point of, how do you define success? Well, some businesses are lifestyle businesses. They don't need to grow 10x every year, so it doesn't mean that they're failing, right? There's also that. But just in terms of the scalable startups, where do businesses fail and why?
Yeah, this is such an important point. And I'd also like to highlight on what you just said now that, there's a difference, I think, between small businesses and, what we're kind of defining as an entrepreneur, those companies that are looking to have that hockey stick growth and become a unicorn. And that's what we're talking about here. So when I say that, you're not going to have that work-life balance, we're talking about those people that want to be unicorns, and that's not for everyone. And I'm not supporting hustle culture across the board. In fact, boo on that. But if you want to be the unicorn, that's unicorns don't sleep.
And that's the reality.
And that's the reality. So to your point, yeah, the majority of startups, they fail. And these are the cold, hard facts. So if we look at why they're failing, the number one reason is that they don't have product market fit. This is the reason, and that's the leading reason. And another interesting statistic that you can put alongside that is that even though 90% fail, only 10% fail in the first year. And the reason I'm putting these two statistics side by side, and the reason I find this so incredibly interesting, is really you should be able to determine much quicker than the first year if you have that product market fit, right? So this highlights something that we see every day at RBV. We receive, on average, 3 to 4 ideas submitted to us by potential founders. And I would say much, much more than 9 times out of 10, people don't do their homework. And this is so incredibly shocking to me because it's not that hard. So take note, if you are a potential founder, do your homework. Figure out what is your market and define your market. And if your answer is, my product is for everyone, you're doing something wrong, okay? You need to figure out what your product market fit is. And in order to do that, you need to define what your market is. And if people did this one super simple initial step, I think we could save so much failure. And I'll say this, and this sounds counterintuitive, but your number one goal when you first start out is to fail as fast as you can. I mean, obviously your goal is to succeed, but if you're gonna fail, you want to do it as fast as you possibly can because you don't want to waste resources. You don't want to waste your time, and you want to move on to the next thing as quickly as you can.
And why do you think that is, that founders completely miss out on doing their homework and don't really hit that product market fit?
There's a couple of different reasons for that. So the first one is, I think people get too close to it. They think that, it becomes their baby in a sense, and they don't want to find anything that conflicts with what they've created, what they've found. They're looking for only supporting information. So they're afraid to find bad news. The second is, I think, almost an even bigger tragedy. And that is people are afraid to talk to potential users. And I've seen examples of this time and time again. And, we'll ask potential founders that come to us, well, who have you talked to about this? What are their thoughts on this? And they'll say a couple of different things. I've heard everything from, well, we don't want to approach potential users until we have a prototype, but that's too late, right? The costs associated with creating a prototype are serious in terms of time and resources. I've also heard people say, no, I don't believe in talking to people. And unfortunately, as a founder, talking to your users is your biggest responsibility. You're not building what you're building for you. And if you are, you're doing it wrong. You're not your user. Your user is your user. So you need to get out there, you need to pound the streets, so to speak, and you need to be talking to people. And is it scary? Yeah, at first it really is. I really struggled with this at first. I'm not an extroverted person by nature. I am not a salesperson at all, but I am motivated by helping people. So if I'm able to frame something in my mind as I want to help this person and I can't help them unless I talk to them, then I'm okay. So that's a little tip and trick. If you can figure out what your motivation is for creating your product, and remember, at this stage, you're not selling anything. You're just connecting with your user. You're trying to help your user. I think that gets you a really long way. And people are a lot more willing to talk to you when you come from that place as well, because they can connect with you and they can sense that you're genuine and
you're trying to solve their problem.
And you're trying to solve their problem.
Yeah.
And it's a win-win situation at that point. Having that early adopter feedback is so incredibly priceless. I can't tell you how many times I've pivoted as a result of the feedback from early adopters. So for example, my company Altwork, which is actually how I got connected with Raha Beach Ventures. Altwork is a platform focused on flexible work arrangements. Talking to early adopters led us to realize that the problems in the recruitment and future of work space were so much greater than we ever had anticipated before. And when we started to discuss the problems and the potential solutions, we realized that recruitment as a whole was so incredibly broken, and that the solution that we were proposing was being limited by the scope of flexible friendly work. So as a result, we pivoted to address recruitment at large. So Altwork has actually shifted because of these conversations that we had. What we were offering was too limited. It was actually too niche. And as a result, there's a completely different product that we're going to be rolling out that addresses the real problems. And we never could have gotten to this point without talking to the people who are actually experiencing these problems. And that's how you get product market fit. You don't guess and then build something and then see. It's not if we build it, they will come, because they're not going to.
Yeah.
It's not like that anymore, because that scarcity of solutions isn't there anymore.
No.
I think that was, I was trying to understand, where does this mentality come from? If we build it, they will come.
I think because I used to work in a digital kind of mid-size company in the kind of mid 2010s, and I was there for a period of 5 years, and the founder was a serial entrepreneur, so within the company he had like multiple businesses. And I think that transition from 2000s onwards, where all the kind of unicorns were coming in, this was a very old mindset where they were just kind of saying, this is a great idea, let's build it and figure it out later. And I actually observed the failure of that in real time, and them having to switch. So all the kind of people in senior leadership positions, I observed them really not being able to achieve results, and them trying and trying again, and like chucking money at the problem, being like, oh, we'll just do a quick fix here and put a plaster on here. And I observed it in real time, and I was like, I actually think that we need to either scrap it all together and start again from scratch with like new technology, or we need to, because at that time, one of the products was like a flat sharing platform in London. And I was living in London as a renter, and I was just like, okay, guys, like I actually don't even use this product that I work for. I'm using the competitor instead because of X, Y, Z. And they were like, oh, great, we need to get more of you in the room. I was like, look around in the business.
Everyone's
All of us are renting.
right
Yeah,
here.
there's only one person sitting at the top that can actually own property in London. The rest of us are renting. I was like, actually, what you need to do is mobilize what you have within the business. And like obviously the voice got heard, and then people had more input. But it's so funny because like you said that, and I was like, actually there is a period of time where this old mindset of build first, and I think it had something to do with the methodologies of waterfall and principles like that, where especially within tech companies now there's a different way of looking at things.
No doubt. What a great experience.
Yeah, like it taught me a lot, to be honest. I think that was very much the experience in my career which kind of shaped the way I approach things. But I think moving forward, definitely with the kind of principles such as like agile and things, and looking at things differently, I think there is a shift in mindset and putting the user first, and that might have multiple things to do with like social media and being consumer focused and access to information, but there is a shift. But I think in that mid 2000s, this is where that came from. It was just a mindset that they were just like, this is the process, this is the step-by-step process, how it has to work, until someone came in and was like, no, actually let's disrupt a little bit and see what comes of it.
And I'd also add that our consumer as the user has changed because we've been so spoiled for choice with so many great products now. So we're not going to adopt a product that doesn't work either. So the bar is much higher, and you can't just expect people to come and use your product and not give you any feedback. We know our rights now, and we know our options, and we will ask for better. Therefore, you need to be responsive to what we're saying. Otherwise, we're going to dump your product. I was literally just reading some stats about it, about apps in the UAE. And it said that close to 60% of apps downloaded in the UAE are deleted within the first 30 days.
Ooh,
that's a lot, right? So you put your time and money and effort into building it, and then they come and download it, and then they go, nope, this is clunky. This doesn't work for me.
And that's so much pressure as a founder, right? Because you only get that one shot at a first impression.
Yeah.
Because how many people are going to go back and reinstall it later?
Yeah.
Like it's not going to happen.
No.
And I guess there was just less choice before.
Yeah.
Where, if you are an innovator and you come up with the idea first, that's great on you. But if you don't adapt and move on, then someone's going to come and disrupt and do it better, like you said, Bianca. And then that's it. You just get deleted.
And the first to market doesn't have the same weight that it once did.
No, absolutely.
And then to wrap that up, I think there is this idea amongst many founders that if they go to market and they speak to a lot of people in that very, very early stage, someone is going to steal their idea, either their consumers or competitors or even some investors. So I've heard a lot of people who are saying, I'm keeping the cards very close to my chest because I don't want anyone else to beat me to the market. What are your thoughts on that?
This is a fear I've heard so many times. So this is a really common fear that honestly, I don't think is terribly founded. Ideas, honestly, at this point are cheap. Being first to market doesn't carry the same weight that once it did. As we've mentioned before, consumers nowadays are completely spoiled for choice. The value lies in execution. So I would say the value in speaking, getting your ideas out there, bouncing your ideas off of people who can offer you insight, establishing that product market fit early and failing as fast as you can, or better yet, succeeding well through solid execution. That's where success lies. So one more point that I didn't bring up earlier that we see often in terms of founders failing is this fear of finding competitors. So often we see missing in pitch decks a competition slide. This is the most often omitted key slide in pitch decks is the competitor slide. And if we ask someone, do you have competition? Do you have a competitor? And they say no, that's the biggest red flag, because this tells us that they do not know how to research. You're always, 99.9% of the time, going to have a competitor. And that's not bad. To find a competitor shows that your idea holds water. You should find this validating. This shows that you have a good idea. So again, you don't have to be first to market to be successful.
I remember when I first visited the UAE, it was 2009, and I have a good friend of mine who was born here, he's now working in Accenture, very successful, and, you know, coming from the UK and being quite young, I was like 22 at the time, and I was like enamored by what was going on around me. I was like, this place is really cool. And I remember him saying to me, you don't have to recreate the wheel here. He was like, there's so much potential. You can just bring an idea that already exists and you will be successful. He was like, it's primed, it's ready. And that's what it wants. It wants ideas that work, exist, have proof that they're going to be successful, and someone will invest in you and you can make it happen. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. But I still think that's the case. I don't think that we've moved past that yet. I still think that there is a lot of potential. When you live here, you see it, I think, a bit more closely where the gaps are, and you're like, oh, okay, this already exists in another market. Maybe I can bring it here. And I still feel like that's the case. So I think that piggybacks on to what you've just said.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So I think that's a really good place to end the conversation today. Thank you so much, Megan. You've really shed some light on the positive parts of entrepreneurship and the expected challenges as well. And it's been really great to hear. We are going to leave a little teaser of what you can expect in the bonus episode. So I'm going to drop the question here now and we'll pick it up again in the bonus. The MENA region aims to reach 100 unicorns by 2030, with Dubai targeting 30 of them. There are currently only 6 unicorns in MENA, of which 4 are in Dubai. If you had the power to elevate one early stage startup to the $1 billion valuation, which one would you pick and how would you help them scale? So a meaty one there for you, Meg.
Very meaty.
So we'll park that there. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Meg.